Last night, the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency met to discuss a tax abatement for a residential development for downtown Ithaca. Another chapter in what has turned out to be a bit of a contentious issue. Well, here to give us a little bit more on that story is the Ithaca Voice's Jeff Stein. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Sam. Thanks so much for having me back on the program.
Yeah, thank you for stopping by. To get us started, I'm wondering if you can just kind of lay out for us what this development is, where is it, what would it be for?
Sure. So Jason Fain, the College Town developer and landlord, as well as a Toronto and New York City developer and landlord, is looking to build 36 units of residential housing across from the police department on East Clinton Street. And it fits what's called the city's BID, which means it's the business improvement district, and an area that's part of the downtown urban core that the city is trying to incentivize growth in. There's lots of reasons for this program to incentivize growth downtown, but a lot of it has to do with environmental goals. If people live in close, compact quarters, they're less likely to drive, waste gas, increase their carbon footprint. There are reasons for keeping dollars here, keeping our tax dollars here. And I guess the third major pillar of this is housing in the city. Obviously, there's an affordable housing crisis in Ithaca. And there's a lot of hope that by incentivizing growth downtown, by encouraging developers to build downtown, that problem will be assuaged. Fain's particular development, wish I could do a better job explaining this visually, but it's kind of up on a hill. You have to know where how Clinton Street flows down, and is 17,000 square feet and brings 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, which is what the city has said over and over that it's looking for. So I don't know if that's enough in the weeds for what you're looking for.
No, that's actually perfect. And you mentioned this idea of an incentive, and I threw that word abatement out there in the intro. I'm wondering if you can maybe unpack for us what a tax abatement actually is.
Yeah, good question. So there's a lot of technical legal jargon for how this actually works, and a lot of that gets lost in the reporting because what matters is sort of the overall takeaway. But it's essentially a program in which government agencies assume the fiduciary obligation of some part of that property. So, for instance, in this case, the IDA or some government agency would therefore be exempting Fain from certain taxes, real estate taxes, some state and local taxes, and therefore driving down in the long term the cost of production. And so if you look at the actual development proposal, Fain's name isn't actually even on here. It's 130 Clinton LLC because of how they incorporate different proposals for building developments. But and so there's lots of legal jargon, but the root of it is essentially here's a break from taxes you would otherwise have to pay to build this property.
So can you talk a little bit now about the process behind deciding how someone receives that abatement? Absolutely.
So Fain has applied under the abatement policy. It was approved as meeting the criteria by city staff. When I first started reporting this, I was confused. I thought that meant that they were granting the merits of the abatement, which is separate from saying it meets our technical criteria for possibly meeting it. And so the debate over whether Fain should get an abatement has sort of taken on many forms, including what is this program actually for? Why do we have this abatement program? And you listen to reasonable people on both sides make cogent arguments for how they think the policy came about, obviously, in order to support their side and their interpretation of this case.
And one other thing I wanted to ask you about, it wasn't, or just to maybe clarify for our listeners, it's not, I've kind of gotten the impression too that there's maybe a bit of hostility in this kind of interaction between this developer and the city. It's not like, I've seen
hostility is probably a tame word for it.
Yeah. I mean, again, there's maybe some have even referred to kind of Fain's demand for a tax abatement as some kind of bluff that the city may or may not call. So I'm curious, like, what your take on the kind of interactions between the Fain and this developer and the city.
And it's this fascinating personal dynamic interaction between probably, outside of the mayor, the best known guy in Ithaca. That might be a bit of an overstatement, but if it is, it's not too far from one. And in that discussion over, it's really just a personality dispute, you have these very technical questions. And I think it's extremely frustrating for some city officials who are in support of development downtown to have to sift through the emotional valence, the emotional resonance of letting Fain off easy. And I think there's that perception that Fain has sort of milked the city for all sorts of money and been a bad public citizen. And, whether you think that should have bearing on this policy or not is an interesting question.
Can we maybe unpack that too? What Fain's reputation, you mentioned that he was kind of known, notorious.
Yeah.
What for?
Someone made the point at the meeting last night that even as the overall, and I haven't fact-checked this myself, but the point was that even as property values in the city are skyrocketing, Fain's property actually declined in value. And I think most people see that as a sign of neglect, a sign that, this is sort of the great holy grail of Ithaca journalism as I see it. Like, why does Jason Fain have so many empty storefronts when it appears to be profitable for him to fill them up? But beyond that question, I'll just bracket that for a second. I think a lot of people at the meeting especially spoke last night about tenants, commercial tenants, businesses who move in with a lot of hope in bringing something new and exciting to the community, and they find out midway through that Fain is hiking their prices. And I've looked through some of the court records and the number of times he's been sued. This hasn't been published in any newspaper yet, but he went after the cars of someone who couldn't pay back the rent on a couple occasions. So those sort of things just build in a small town. Those little stories kind of pile up, and then you're left. And then the fact that he doesn't live here and seems to spend most of his time in Toronto. One thing I'll just add, a few months ago, unrelated to this project, College Town had just come forward with the city had come forward with a new set of zoning requirements for College Town. It said, previously you could only build something like 2 or 3 stories in College Town. Now we're going to increase that to 6. Mm-hmm. So new opportunity for developers to build much higher than they were before. Fain comes in. Do you see this? Do you know what he wants? Yeah. 12 stories, twice the legal limit that they just approved. And so that's sort of ballsiness. I don't know if that's a word you can say on the air.
It's maybe a mark of his reputation in town. Confidence.
Yeah. So maybe you could expand a little bit more on sort of different perspectives community members might have on, reactions that they have maybe against the abatement.
Yeah, it was actually really enlightening for me because I had expected it to be all Jason Fain is evil and down with Jason Fain, but there were a lot of sort of nuanced criticisms about that site in particular, about, I think generalized fears that the city is building too much too fast and that, it really risks destroying some of its natural beauty if we sort of put major developments in every vacant lot. I think there's concerns that, the creek walk in that area will get polluted with more and more density downtown in that section. So environmental concerns of aesthetics of the neighborhood, concerns that, we don't need more downtown density really surprised me because I was just expecting the scapegoating of the developer himself. So I thought that was interesting and important to note. People oppose this not just because of this personal animus towards Jason Fain.
And thinking about what happened at the meeting, there was no vote taken, correct? This is kind of still open.
Yeah, the vote will be next Thursday, I believe. Mm-hmm.
And what would be your prediction for the way this might go?
I think it's going to get shot down. And I'll say this, as not a normative assessment, but sort of like what I think is an empirical one. The IDA is really... It's not supposed to be a political body, but it's made up of political representatives. So you have the mayor and officials on the county legislature and others who are subject to the public whim. And I think anyone who's really looking at the comments on our Facebook page, for instance, will see that there's a lot of hostility towards Fain, and nobody wants to be seen as giving him a leg up. Whether the officials will overcome that sort of public animosity is an interesting question. Although perhaps that's unfair. Perhaps they oppose it for other reasons, or perhaps they just genuinely don't think it's a good idea, and the public outrage over it is irrelevant. So I think trying to untangle all these factors and fairly say, what will happen to this thing, I still think it's going to get shot down. A, because of the developer's reputation, and B, because the inextricable politics of the IDA.
And just maybe one little quick follow-up. If this does get shot down, have you heard of anything else that's been proposed for that site?
Good question. I think there were a few other proposals, but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. So that's something.
Not 100% sure. Before the Ithaca Voice was around, I think.
Well, that's something we'll just have to keep an eye on. Jeff Stein is the editor of the Ithaca Voice, and we've been talking about what happened in regards to tax abatements for a proposed development for downtown Ithaca at last night's meeting of the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency. Jeff, as always, thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you, Sam.